So, you're interested in Warhammer and you want your first army, or you're already in too deep. I mean, you already have an army and now you want a second one, or a fourth one. Well, how do you decide from the 20 plus armies that exist? And yes, I know a good chunk of this number is actually Space Marines, but there's also even more to choose from if you're interested in fantasy battles or Age of Sigmar. And with so many different cool models and somewhat unique playstyles, choosing just one faction can be difficult. So break out that pen and paper and get ready to surrender your wallet, because I'm here to help you choose your first army. Or fifth. But welcome back everyone, it's me the Warhammer complainy guy, Revan/Handy, destroyer of wallets and maker of terrible financial decisions. So choosing an army is the biggest leap of faith when it comes to participating in Warhammer, because this army is something you're going to have with you for a very long time, hopefully. Your army will also be sort of a time capsule over the years as you collect and paint more miniatures. These first minis may not look that great, but the more you paint, the better it gets, because practice makes perfect. So the first thing you should do when deciding to get your first army or another army is doing some basic research, like brushing up on the lore and also just staring at the miniatures. It took me about 3 months to decide I wanted to paint and collect Dark Angels when I got my first army, if we ignore the Warlord Titan. So I recommend just going on YouTube, typing in an army, then going on an adventure that may last a few days or months. But after that, go to the GW website and peruse the armies available to whichever game system you enjoy. So look at the minis and decide which ones catch your fancy. Figure out which armies appeal to you the most if you're also taking lore into account. Do you like the Arthurian Knight look of the Dark Angels? Or do you like the sickly and grotesque imagery of the Death Guard? Or do you like holding grudges against your enemies? Then maybe look at the Votann. Or do you think giant robots are cool? Then go with either the Imperial or Chaos Knights. And don't get a Titan unless you're ready to go full send, because my god, Titans are getting so expensive. Or if fantasy is more your thing, there's the traditional elves and dwarves, and also the funny rats, the Skaven. All of this talk of choosing an army you like then leads to my second suggestion, which is the rule of cool. The rule of cool is literally just pick whatever you think looks cool, be it because of the lore or the miniature designs. For me, I like giant robots, so I picked the Warlord Titan and then the Imperial Knights. Then for Space Marines, I chose Dark Angels because they have more drip than the other Space Marines. Then I got Custodes because I was stupid and got a Telemon Dreadnought at my last trip to the Warhammer Cafe LA before I moved. And then a few days later, I decided he needed some friends. And then Ickbard sent me some funny rats for Christmas. Then finally, probably gonna soon have a Tau army because everyone voted for the Taunar, and also Ickbard found the Tau Christmas box for a discount. But the rule of cool should always be the first thing you take into consideration when you want to get an army. Then the next thing you need to take into consideration is obviously the cost. Some armies cost more than others. For example, the cheapest armies to collect if you exclude Forge World kits is usually Custodes or Knights, while the most expensive armies are usually Horde armies. This includes Tyranids, Orcs, Sisters, and Guard to some extent. This cost is partially due to unit counts or just a lack of models in some ranges, along with GW artificially jacking up the cost of an army due to the unit count in a box. If we use Knights and Custodes as an example, they have the smallest range of models in 40k excluding Forge World, because Knights and Custodes are considered elite armies, and one unit can have either 2 times or 4 times the points cost of a single Space Marine or Guard unit, so it means less units needed to reach 2,000 points. As an example, here's a 2,000 points Custodes army, a 2,000 points Knights army, and 2,000 points of Space Marines. Then if we get to Guard and AdMech, the reason why they're expensive is because one is a Horde army and the other is just expensive because GW. If you're going with Guard, be prepared, and I mean really be prepared, to have over 70 models compared to the 20 or 30 for Space Marines, and even less with Custodes and Knights. You can pretty much say that any Horde army is going to be expensive, like Orcs, Sisters, Tyranids, Necrons, and Guard depending on what you buy. But usually these armies are associated with being hordes of miniatures, with AdMech still unfortunately being number 1 when it comes to being the most expensive army, with Sisters and Guard being tied for second. You can reduce this cost by obviously getting army boxes, combat patrols, and just perusing eBay or Troll Trader for great deals on used miniatures. But remember, just buy within your own means and at your own pace. Just don't go f it we ball like I did unless you really want to. But anyways, it's that time again. That's right, it's time for some audience interaction to help boost it to the almighty YouTube algorithm. So if you're enjoying the video so far, please like and subscribe because it helps this elaborate post of a channel grow. But let me know in the comments down below, if you're thinking about getting an army, which one is it? Or if you already have an army, why did you pick that army? Or how many armies do you have? Because I have 5 if I include the Warlord Titan. So with that out of the way, the next thing you need to consider when getting an army is actually how easy are they to build. The difficulty of building or painting an army can be make or break for some people, and also the miniatures to some extent. Because some of these miniatures are small and fragile, and they have parts that can easily break if you look at them the wrong way. But the easiest army to build is obviously Space Marines, because of course GW would want the flagship army to be simple enough for anyone to assemble. The same can also be said for Custodes. I would say about as easy as Space Marines to assemble if we exclude Forge World models. Imperial Knights I would say is medium to high difficulty to assemble, 1 because they're large models, 2 you need to also know how to magnetize stuff if you want to get your money's worth out of the plastic you just bought, and finally you have to know how to fill and sand down gaps because they can be a bit unsightly if you don't do it correctly, especially when you get to the painting step. If you've built Gunpla before, you should honestly have no problem with Knights, Imperial, or Chaos. Speaking of Chaos, Chaos is an interesting army to build because not only are they all unique from each Chaos God faction, but also no matter which one they're from, you'll also always be making a sacrifice to Khorne, either from getting poked, sliced, or stabbed when assembling the miniatures, because Khorne always gets his dues no matter which faction you play. Admech also is kind of noteworthy for this too, because they're fragile and can also poke you, but mostly the fragile part because a lot of the models are small and spindly. But once you've decided on your army, the next thing you need to consider is painting said army. In Warhammer, there's really no incorrect way to paint your army unless you're Space Marines. What I mean by this is you can paint your army however you want for everything to an extent, because say if you're playing Dark Angels, it might not be a very good idea to paint them a crack blue. Or if you're playing Imperial Fists, you probably don't want to paint them silver for obvious reasons. The beauty of Warhammer is that you make your army your army. No 2 armies are going to be the same, even if they're the same color. So one Dark Angels army can look completely different from another. Knights are unique in their own right because there isn't really a definitive paint scheme. Even though there are a lot of lore specific paint schemes, usually everyone is going to make their own Knight house. You should also follow the most important acronym for pretty much anything. Keep it simple, stupid. Or KISS. Don't make your army's paint scheme any more difficult than it needs to be, because the easier the scheme is to replicate, the more enjoyable your painting experience will be. You should stick to only using a few colors for your models. The secret is using different washes for different colors. So the same gold washed with different shade paints will look different and create contrast. Just be careful that you don't drop the shade paint. Another fun trick is you can also use different contrast paints as shades, so the variation in the few colors you use can be endless. So just go at your own pace and paint your army however you want to. But now that you've chosen your army and hopefully painted a few miniatures, then arguably the most important part now comes into play. Where the f am I going to store these and how am I going to transport them to the game store? Now, depending on your army, especially if it's a horde army, you'll need a dedicated space to display and store it. So using the earlier examples of a 2,000 point army size, as you can see, a 2,000 point army takes up a decent amount of space. Of the armies I currently own, 2,000 points of Knights takes up less space than my Custodes and Space Marines. And these are just the ones I have built and also not in the display case because I have over 5,000 points of Custodes and I own almost every single Imperial Knight in existence. I don't know what self-control is, but as you can see, 2,000 points of Space Marines takes up the most space. That is until I get 2,000 points of the funny rats, because I have 4 going on possibly 5 armies, again 6 if I include the Warlord Titan, stop asking. So I obviously needed a lot of space to display them. Some display cases I recommend if you want to go the IKEA route is the Blauladin, Millsbow, or the Fabricor. But the Fabricor is only if you have a Warlord Titan because that's the only one it fits in. You can also honestly just throw them on a big enough shelf, but then you would have to dust them regularly. But now that the at-home storage situation is solved, how do we get said miniatures to the game store? Well, you can do that with today's... I don't have a sponsor. Well, first, I recommend not getting a transport case that uses foam, because then the paint on your miniatures can rub off over time, and also the pointy bits can get stuck in the foam and break. These work fine if you need to move unpainted miniatures, or if you need to move an army, or in my case multiple armies across the country on short notice. What I recommend you do is either get a pre-built MDF carry case like the ones from Tabletop Stronghold, hashtag not sponsored by the way, or any of the other multiple companies that produce them. Or just making your own using a very large storage case that you can magnetize using metal sheets and sticking small magnets to the bottom of your miniatures. But yeah, that's just some of my recommendations if you're thinking about getting your first army or you want to get a fifth one. Anyways, thanks for watching the video, and a huge thank you to the GIGAist of the Chads right here, the Costcodian Guard, keepers of the Costco hot dogs, aka the channel members and Twitch subscribers. Don't forget all the basic YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and maybe become a channel member too if you want to help this elaborate shitpost of a channel. So I have to go make more terrible financial decisions, so I'll see you all in the next video, and remember, when you play Warhammer, being poor is a choice.